Paul Harrell, weekdays from 4 to 6. Learn more at paulharrell.com.
Congressman Bruce Westerman with us. Congressman, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Paul, good to be back. It's been a while since I've been with you.
I know it has, and I know you guys have been really busy up there in Washington, D.C. How are things going?
Well, it's a busy month for sure right now, back here in September with a lot of deadlines looming, so there is no problem finding something to occupy my time right now, I can tell you that for sure. But that's the case most of the time here in D.C., pretty fast-paced.
Well, so let's get to just some of the current events that have happened this week. Starting with the most recent, it looks like, and this has just been all over the headlines about, President Trump and the debt ceiling negotiation, and now it's involving, a more prominent role for Democrats. And it seems like leadership wanted, an 18-month debt ceiling increase, and now we're only going to go for a 3-month. What are your thoughts on this whole process?
I've got mixed thoughts on it. I think we were blowing an opportunity here to start with because and a lot of the talks I've had about the debt ceiling in the past was that in exchange for voting to increase the debt ceiling, we needed to get some spending reforms, especially some restrictions on mandatory spending. This $20 trillion debt continuing to grow, and somehow or another, as huge as it is, it's almost like it's invisible. But we've got to do something to address that debt. So I was hopeful that when the debt ceiling came up, we were going to be able to enact some spending reforms so that we didn't have to deal with with raising the debt ceiling again, and hopefully get that debt going in the other direction. But I think the deal the president has cut with the Democrats, as far as I can tell, has no strings attached to the debt ceiling. And I guess if there's a silver lining to the cloud, it's that it only goes through December, so maybe we'll be able to come back in December and offer some real fiscal reforms before we raise the debt ceiling again.
I would certainly hope so, and I know some of this is tied to the Harvey relief, and who knows, by this time next week it may be tied to, South Florida relief. It's just interesting. Nobody talks about the debt ceiling anymore. I mean, I'm sorry, no one talks about the national debt anymore. And, my fear is when we used to talk about eventually the chickens are going to come home to roost, we're going to have to pay the piper. Nobody really talks about that anymore. We're mortgaging our children's future. And my fear is we got people up there, I know you're not one of them, Congressman, but that think, well, we spent $20 trillion and nothing bad's happened, so we can spend $40. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, and there's no limit to it. When we have emergencies like Harvey, and this probably going to have some more spending, and FEMA's already out of money this year, that's the time when you have to take care of people's needs. So I don't have any problem with voting to increase funding to FEMA so that we can help people who are truly in need. But now we're tying the debt ceiling to that. They're putting a continuing resolution on it in the Senate. And I'm hearing now that part of the funding for the hurricane relief going to some grant programs that have a history of being misused during a natural disaster. So I'll probably vote against the bill when it comes back from the Senate. We have got to take a firmer stand on our spending, and it's really out of control.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there is some, I think, good work going on in the House, just from what I can see. I understand you guys are finally passing 12 appropriation bills this year. The last one, or this week, you're scheduled to pass one, I guess. And this hasn't happened since like 2006. Talk about the importance of the appropriation bills.
Yeah, I think it may have even been since the 90s since it's happened.
Wow.
So, when we look at government spending, there are two categories. There's mandatory and discretionary. And on the discretionary side, you have 12 appropriation bills. One of the biggest ones is the defense appropriation bill, but you've got the Interior Appropriation, Homeland Security, all of those 12 bills that fund the agencies that provide the services that I think most Americans think are what the government's here for. But that's only about 25% of the total spending. We're actually going to get all 12 of those bills passed through the House, get them over to the Senate. But the Senate's sending a continuing resolution back to us today or tomorrow with the Harvey funding, so that on September 30th, the government won't run out of money and have problems that way. But instead of taking up our bills that we're going to send over there, they're just doing the CR up through December. But hopefully we'll have a negotiating tool so that the Senate will actually do the appropriations process instead of doing another continuing resolution.
So you're saying it's a good thing that the House is actually passing the appropriation bills, but as of right now, everything is still going to be kind of status quo until the Senate comes around and says, hey, we're going to start budgeting the way we're supposed to budget.
Yeah.
Okay.
And right now the Senate is sending a continuing resolution over so that you don't have the showdown at the end of September. But I think the House is going to be in much better positioning power because we can say we went through the appropriations process. We passed all 12 appropriation bills. We debated them on the floor. We were up till close to 11 p.m. last night doing amendments. It could go past midnight tonight doing amendments. But we're going to get through these 12 bills and get the appropriations package over to the Senate. All these appropriation bills have been through the Appropriations Committee process in the House. Lots and lots of work going into that. So, in my opinion, once we pass those bills and send them to the Senate, we can tell the Senate we're done until you pass those bills and send something back to us.
We are talking.
So that's the way the process is supposed to work,
and I certainly hope it does. I hope it gets back to, hey, let's start actually let's let Congress do what Congress is supposed to do, not this basically managing it from one crisis to the next, and gives the media the opportunity to say, oh, the debt ceiling and everything else. We're talking with Congressman Bruce Westerman. Other news this week is the DACA announcement. First, we kind of had a lot of stuff in the press. Hey, this stuff is going to end in 6 months unless Congress acts. Now we kind of hear, well, it's going to end in 6 months, but, we might revisit it if Congress fails. So it's kind of now in the legislature's lap, the legislative branch's lap, for you guys to deal with this. And so what are your thoughts on this, Congressman Westerman?
Well, that's where it should be. It should have never been put into law by the administration, and the courts have said this. It continues to fail in courts. There are more attorney generals. I believe Arkansas's attorney general is even going to file suit on it. And it's a clear violation of the separation of powers, what the Obama administration did, setting up the DACA program. So it's one of the things that we're really working on here in Congress is, or at least in the House, is to restore the Article I constitutional authority to the legislative branch, where we're making the laws and the executive branch is enforcing the laws. So, it's not an easy issue to deal with, but it's certainly one that we were elected to deal with, and I think we'll come up with a good solution that follows the Constitution that's fair to people.
I mean, how are we going to do this? I mean, when you look at, I agree with what you said. He never had the authority. Obama never had the authority to do this. We have a situation where people who are crossing in this country illegally, we have not secured our borders. So it just grows and grows. This whole problem that we're now faced with. And Sarah Huckabee Sanders was talking about how this needs to be tied to in some way. Trying to secure our borders, whether it's building a wall or whatever. And, back when George W. Bush was trying to do his comprehensive immigration reform or the Gang of Eight bill, the conservative line on this has always been, look, let's figure out what to do with the people who are here illegally, but can we please do that after we stop, the influx of people coming in and breaking our laws? And that, to me, just from what I have seen, has always been a non-negotiable with Democrats and people on the left. So where does it go from here, Congressman?
Well, I think you summed it up pretty well. The first thing we've got to do is enforce our existing immigration laws. We have to secure the border. And, as far as what the president wants to do on securing the border and him making this agreement with the Democrats, I don't understand how all that plays together, but I hope he has a plan for it. Because I think he had a lot of leverage on implementing some of his border security measures. But I will give him and Jeff Sessions and the administration credit, because the number of illegal border crossings has decreased tremendously since President Trump's been elected. And we need to continue to work on the operational security so that we know who crosses and how long they're here. And we've got to stop the illegal crossings. And, it's like we're trying to clean up the water now, but we need to go back and plug the pipe before we worry a whole lot about cleaning up what the problem is.
So tell me about, I appreciate your comments on DACA, by the way. Tell me about this Natural Resources Committee, because you are now the chairman of a subcommittee underneath that committee. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's the subcommittee on oversight and investigation. So Chairman Bishop named me the chairman of that subcommittee. There are 5 subcommittees in the whole committee. I'm also on the federal lands subcommittee. I do a lot of work there in the forestry sector because I have a forestry degree, and I'm the only one in the House that has that. But being able to chair that subcommittee is really neat from my perspective, because that particular subcommittee has jurisdiction equal to the whole committee, because we're looking at government waste, lack of transparency, those kinds of issues that deal in the whole realm of the Natural Resources Committee. So, I get to set the agenda for the hearings that we do and kind of direct the discussions and the policy that comes out of the whole committee through that subcommittee. So I'm excited about that opportunity.
I'm glad you reminded me that in the audience that you're the only congressman up there with a forestry degree. I think that's really fantastic, and that's representing Arkansas well. I know you were involved in the forestry bill. So give us an update on that. And also, are you following what's going on out west? There's a lot of fires burning, thousands of acres out there burning right now.
Oh, absolutely. I actually made some trips out west during August, and it was pretty smoky everywhere I went out there, and the fires have only gotten worse since I was out there. So we're continuing to see these catastrophic wildfires, and we're going to continue seeing them as long as we keep the same policy in place, as long as we continue to do what we've been doing since the early 90s, and that's kind of a hands-off approach to managing our national forest. I don't know that many taxpayers realize that $7.1 billion of their tax money goes to fund the Forest Service, or that's how much went to fund the Forest Service in 2016, and the amount of timber harvested off the Forest Service was like $162 million, which is less than 3% of the money that was spent to fund the Forest Service.
Wow.
The Forest Service has become the U.S. Fire Service. It's the largest fire department in the world, with about 13,000 people who are dedicated to fire.
Gosh, I had no idea. But yeah, that makes sense. I mean, because it's just like every year, every season, there's going to be just massive wildfires somewhere in the country.
Yeah, we're spending close to $3 billion per year just to be prepared to fight fires.
Wow. Well,
it's when you really dig into the numbers and look at the magnitude of it, it makes you scratch your head and think you've got all these private forest landowners, you've got tribal forest landowners, you've got state forest landowners, and they actually manage the land so that it produces income for the ownership, and is an asset to have. And I think that's what our founders and the people, Teddy Roosevelt, Gifford Pinchot, the ones that established the Forest Service, that's the vision they had for the U.S. forest. Now, we've still got national parks, and we've got wilderness areas and all those things that are natural areas to be left in nature, but we've certainly got off course on what we're doing with our national forests.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly. Well, it's good to have somebody that's skeptical of the status quo there. Congressman Westerman, and I think that a lot of people. That's why they voted for you. Quite honestly.
Well, I don't know. It's neat to have an area of expertise that's unique in anything that you do. My career was my undergraduate degree is in engineering, so most of my work before I came to Congress was more in engineering than in forestry, but I did pass the Arkansas Registered Forester's exam, and I practiced forestry there in Arkansas and other places before I was elected to Congress. And it's when you get up here and you find out that the federal government owns hundreds of millions of acres of forest land, and you've got an expertise in that area, it's pretty valuable to have.
Mm-hmm. Congressman Bruce Westerman, I appreciate you coming on the program. Just feel free to keep us updated about what's going on. If you ever need to use this program for a medium to talk to your constituents, you're always welcome, and we do appreciate you coming on, sir.
Well, it's always good to visit with you, Paul, and I wish you a good day. I heard the weather's very nice back in Arkansas right now, unlike in the Caribbean.
Congressman Westerman, appreciate it. Y'all be safe.
Thanks, Paul.